Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. The deliberation on the 2026 General Appropriations Bill is no ordinary budget deliberation. We come from a 2025 budget fraught with so much controversy. In fact, with a case still pending before the Supreme Court. And now, constrained to just 9 days, we often stayed into the wee hours of the morning when fatigue tested our determination. Yet, despite the limited time, the minority worked tirelessly to scrutinize this budget. And through our ranks, though our ranks are few, we stood our ground and spoke with resolve, proving that conviction, not numbers, sustain the debate in this chamber. Madam Speaker, the national budget is not just a ledger of pesos and centavos. It is the most powerful policy tool of government, a mirror of our priorities, a test of our commitments, and a covenant with the Filipino people. Through this budget, we answer the most basic questions. Who do we protect? Whose voices do we hear? Whose future do we secure? The 2026 National Expenditure Program presents opportunities, yet also reveals gaps that must be addressed. Today, the minority rises not to reject for the sake of rejection, but to call for realignment, accountability, and courage, so that this budget may truly serve the people. Madam Speaker, let me proceed with some of our key observations on the proposed 2026 General Appropriations Bill. We are a nation battered by typhoons, floods, and rising seas. Yet, the sense of urgency in this budget is lacking. Flood control projects which could have shielded our communities are too often delayed, riddled with questions and controversies, and now set aside. Locally funded flood control projects have even been removed from the DPWH National Expenditure Program. Thus, after the investigations on flood control, it has become all the more urgent that we allocate the necessary funds to ensure these projects are finally completed. At a time when storms go fiercer and the storm surges threaten to wash away entire towns, we cannot afford for the budget to fall short in protecting our most vulnerable. The DENR, entrusted with protecting our environment, receives only 29.3 billion, a mere 0.43% of the 6.793 trillion budget. Meanwhile, 1.556 trillion is poured into infrastructure, including projects like the Kaliwa Dam that displace indigenous people and degrade ecosystems. Critical programs and underfunded. The National Greening Program gets only 1.66 billion. Biodiversity protection is lost by 65% from the 8.8 billion to 3.08 billion. And solid waste management is given just 346 million. I repeat, solid waste management is given just 346 million. Considerably very small in the face of Metro Manila's garbage crisis. And as Congressman Edgar Erese of Caloocan reminds us, piecemeal allocations for solid waste will never be enough. What we need is a comprehensive National Solid Waste Management Program, one that supports local government units with modern waste facilities, invests in segregation and recycling systems, and builds a real circular economy. Without such a program, we are merely sweeping the problem aside while communities struggle with mounting waste and pollution. Though 983 billion is labeled as climate-related expenditures, 76.7% is funneled to DPWH, 13% to the Department of Transportation, and barely 1% to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. This is climate budgeting by mislabeling. Most painful of all, the Pacific-facing provinces, Eastern Samar, Northern Samar, Southern Leyte, Surigao, Catanduanes, Bicol, Isabela, and Aurora, remain without sea walls, evacuation centers, or resilient infrastructure. They shield the nation from every typhoon, yet they are left most exposed. Madam Speaker, when Filipinos fall sick, they look not for promises, but for hospital beds, doctors, and medicine. Yet, the Department of Health admits that there are only 28,153 hospital beds nationwide, when laws require more than 118,000. That is 0.5 beds for every 1,000 Filipinos, far below World Health Organization standard of 2 beds per 1,000. Patients are forced to sleep in hallways. Provincial hospitals remain under-equipped, and intensive care unit facilities are not expanding fast enough. As Congresswoman Laila de Lima of ML Party List and Congresswoman Iris Montes of the 4K Party List have emphasized, the deeper concern is the underfunding of the Universal Healthcare Law. Universal healthcare is not a suggestion. It is a mandate. The government is legally obliged to subsidize PhilHealth premiums for senior citizens, PWDs, informal workers, and the poorest families. Instead of fulfilling this duty, government shifts the burden to ordinary workers. Healthcare cannot be universal if government refuses to pay its share. Madam Speaker, a people's budget must also nurture. Yet, as Congresswoman Audrey K. Zuberio Bukidnon points out, social services are left wanting. The Sugar Regulatory Administration continues to receive less than the 2 billion mandated by law. State universities and colleges see their capital outlay halved to 9.56 billion, forcing state universities and colleges to turn students away. The supplementary feeding program covers only 120 days when experts recommend at least 200. 1 million senior citizens remain waitlisted for their 1,000 pesos pension. And even our cultural institutions like the Cultural Center of the Philippines are left struggling with a fraction of their proposed budget. These are not marginal concerns. They go to the heart of our commitment to farmers, children, seniors, and our national identity. And if we talk about social services, we must also talk about targeting and efficiency. For years, Representative J.C. Avalos of Corpus Party List and this representation have pushed for the completion of the Community-Based Monitoring System, or CBMS. The CBMS Act was passed in 2019 precisely to provide localized poverty data, ensuring that programs like the 4Ps are evidence-based, better targeted, and more efficient. Yet, it was only in 2024 that the Philippine Statistics Authority committed to complete its data gathering, and only last month that it began transmitting the information needed to update the 4Ps list. Madam Speaker, community-based monitoring system is not just for DSWD. With this data, the Department of Labor and Employment could better direct to PAT. The Department of Health could improve localized health programs, and the Department of Education could more accurately address dropouts and malnutrition. Without CBMS, our populations risk being blind and inefficient. With CBMS, we can ensure every peso is guided by accurate sector-specific data. And in the same way that we must protect health and welfare, so too we must defend rights. The Commission on Human Rights originally proposed 2.19 billion for 2026, but only 1.382 billion was approved, a 36% cut. As Congresswoman Arlene Bacau of Dinagat Islands has underscored, this weakens its ability to investigate abuses, to educate communities, and to provide direct support to victims. Supporting the Commission on Human Rights is not a partisan issue. It is about democracy and dignity. Madam Speaker, as Congresswoman Sarah Jane Ilago of Gabriela Women's Party List reminds us, social protection must respond to the real struggles of our people. Adolescent mothers who need stronger reproductive health and support programs. Solo parents who under Republic Act 11861 are entitled to monthly cash subsidy that must be funded in this budget. And our youngest learners whose future depends on restoring early childhood. Early Childhood Care and Development Council's budget to its 2026 level. These are not mere line items. They are lifelines for families, ensuring that no child, no parent, and no mother is left behind. Madam Speaker, the President himself declared that we must move away from car-centric policies. The Philippine Development Plan echoes this, yet the budget tells a different story. As Congresswoman Laila de Lima has highlighted, the Department of Transportation's allocation has doubled, but active transport walkways, bike lanes, safe commuter terminals remains unfunded. Billions still go to roads and flyovers, even though only 6% of households own cars. The 94% who walk, ride, or bike are left with crumbs. If government is serious about ending car-centric policies, then let us see it in the budget, with funds for walkways, bike lanes, and safe commuter hubs. The neglect is also clear in food security. The National Irrigation Administration still has no clear master plan and fails to submit required reports. As Congressman Sergio Dagohoc of APIC Party List points out, Without accountability and clear direction, farmers are left in limbo. At the same time, the Civil Aeronautics Board must confront the high cost of air travel and weak enforcement of passenger rights. Affordable and reliable air transport should not be a privilege for the few, but a right for all Filipinos. And if we talk of rights and services, we must also talk of safety. The Department of Interior and local government's budget remains 82% skewed towards salaries, much of which goes unused due to thousands of vacancies. Meanwhile, frontline agencies like the Bureau of Fire Protection and Bureau of Jail Management and Penology lack equipment, facilities, and resources. Representative Paulo Marcolita of Sagip Party List has put it at best. Public safety must be measured not in salaries appropriated, but in the lives saved. That is why we support reallocating idle funds into fire trucks, personal protective equipment, radios, jail decongestion, and local government unit disaster resilience. On digital security, Congressman Robert Nasal of Bagong Henerasyon Party List has underscored a critical point. 90% of our country's data is stored overseas, leaving us vulnerable to hacking and breaches. To address this, the Department of Information and Communication Technology estimates at least 2.5 billion pesos is needed for local data centers to strengthen cybersecurity and safeguard sensitive information. This must be provided in the 2026 General Appropriations Act, either through realignment from less urgent allocations or sourced from the Spectrum Users Fund, or SUF, with a special provision in the 2025 General Appropriations Act retained. Madam Speaker, digital security is national security. Without it, every Filipino remains at risk. Madam Speaker, no budget is complete without justice for workers and hope for students. As Congressman Eli San Fernando of Kamangagawa Party List reminds us, workers cannot be left unprotected and students cannot be unsupported. Our labor inspections reach only 2% of establishments, with 41% of those inspected found non-compliant. Nearly 920,000 government workers remain contractual, normalizing job insecurity. Wage policies still leave millions earning below basic needs. On education, the tertiary education subsidy has dwindled in reach, covering only 1 in 5 of the poorest students. State universities and colleges continue to lack classrooms, dorms, and laboratories, making free tuition an empty promise for those left without facilities. Madam Speaker, allow me to raise a grave matter in the energy sector. The Department of Energy's suspension of mandatory biofuel blending. Energy policy, Madam Speaker, must be guided by law and by justice. Yet today, we face a troubling contradiction. The Biofuels Act of 2006 or Republic Act 9367 is clear. Blending biofuels into our liquid fuels is mandatory to promote energy security, reduce dependence on imported oil, protect the environment, and support the livelihoods of our coconut and sugar farmers. And yet, the Department of Energy has suspended biofuel blending without a provision in law allowing such suspension. At best, the law permits only a temporary halt under very limited and justifiable grounds. To leave this suspension indefinite is to run counter to the spirit and even the letter of the law. Besides, we are allocating funds to the different departments precisely for the implementation of the law. Yet, it is troubling when the very same department chooses to suspend its implementation. This policy reversal undermines not only our renewable energy goals, but also the incomes of coconut and sugar farmers whose products fuel this industry. Every month of suspension means lost income for the farmer, lost opportunity for the environment, and lost momentum in reducing our reliance on imported oil. The mandatory blending of biofuels will immediately benefit millions of our coconut and sugar farmers, securing their livelihoods while advancing our renewable energy goals. Thus, we strongly urge the Department of Energy to immediately enforce the mandatory provision on biofuel blending. Madam Speaker, this is not merely about fuel. It is about faithfulness to law, about climate responsibility, and about justice to our farmers. Finally, Madam Speaker, as Congressman Shell Jokno of Akbayan partly says caution, unprogrammed appropriations once intended by standby funds for contingencies have ballooned into a parallel budget system from less than 250 billion before 2022, they skyrocketed to over 1.5 trillion in 2023 and 2024. Inside these appropriations, we find not contingencies, but programmed items disguised as standby funds. Infrastructure assistance, Armed Forces of the Philippines modernization, even PhilHealth subsidies. This undermines Congress' power of the purse and evades proper scrutiny. Hence, there is a compelling need to abolish unprogrammed appropriations altogether. After all, if genuine and urgent needs arise, Congress always has the power to pass a supplemental budget. Madam Speaker, instead of pouring billions into questionable ventures, we should be directing these funds toward projects that truly matter. Consider the Sorsogon Northern Summer Bridge, the Southern Leyte Surigao del Norte Bridge. These are not luxuries, but transformative undertakings that would physically unite Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. On a positive note, for the feasibility study of the Sorsogon Northern Summer Bridge, a crucial first step towards its realization. Yet, we must also ensure that such funding translates into actual progress so that these bridges may no longer remain dreams on paper, but lifelines of development and unity for regions. Madam Speaker, distinguished colleagues, as we bring these deliberations to a close, let me emphasize that the national budget must always be more than numbers. It must be a reflection of our people's needs, their struggles, and their hopes for a better future. It is about protecting the vulnerable, uplifting workers and farmers, strengthening health and education, defending rights, and investing in infrastructure that unites our islands. As we look ahead, the work does not end here. The deliberations in the Bicameral Conference Committee must be transparent and is open to the public. Otherwise, all our efforts in this chamber would have been put to naught if the process is still done in secrecy. The people deserve to see in full light how their money is being decided upon. If there is one lesson we can draw from this process, it is that 9 days, however long our nights and stretch into nearly hours of mourning, will never be enough to fully scrutinize a 6.793 trillion budget. Perhaps in the next budget hearings, we can devote more time for the deliberation, for if we are able to decide on the people's money, we must ensure that every voice is heard and every question answered. Madam Speaker, we could still point out many more observations, but in the end, in the natural order of things, minority will always be outvoted by the majority. Even so, we hope that the observations we have raised be given due consideration and carried out into the period of amendments and then up to the bicameral conference committee. For this, we thank the majority for their magnanimity and understanding throughout these deliberations. We may stand on different sides of the aisle, but in the end, we share one commitment to make a budget truly worthy of our people. This spirit of cooperation is clearly manifested when we jointly allocated 12.3 billion to cover the deficiency in the universal access to quality tertiary education program from 2022 to 2025 during the budget budget briefing of the state universities and colleges and the Commission on Higher Education. Let us therefore work tirelessly for this cause, for its success will be the triumph of us all, and its failure will be a burden we shall all bear together. Kailangan bumangon tayo mula sa kinalalagyan natin ngayon at may harap sa sambayanan ang isang General Appropriations Act of 2026 na masasabi natin na may buong paninindigan na ginawa natin ang lahat ng ating makakaya para sa ikauunlad ng ating bansa at ikagagalak ng taong bayan. Maraming salamat po.